First of all, I would like to say thanks to Karna and the organizers who created this event and make it really a place to be here. And my primary language is not English. I work in Hindi, Urdu, and Punjabi and Avdi. But I would like to share my thoughts, and if anywhere I miss or fail to communicate, then I will ask Richa to fill in the gaps. So we will talk about our work together rather than separately, and we will talk about Alliance work in three sides of work. SKMS. SKMS is a short form of Sangtin Kisan Mazdoor Sangatan. It's an organization in northern India of laborers and farmers. And second is Parakh Theatre across border. Parakh means a critical eye, through which we are doing our theatre work, and we are trying to relate our work and literature or not. Third is a classroom in a US research university, and Richa has been involved chiefly as a creative writer or strategist who also works in research university here, and me as a writer, actor, director of theatre and films. Education is not simply learning. In transformative work, education is about unlearning and relearning. We all become educators of each other with each other. And what role can theatre play in that work, and how can theatre become an organic part of the movement of pedagogies for justice? So,
again, I want to say shukriya to Parakh and to everybody here for being here, and all the people who worked so hard to organize the conversations. And I especially also want to just express my gratitude for everybody who participated in the theatre workshop yesterday. It just instilled a new life in me, and so I'm grateful for that. So just to say a few words about SKMS, just because we've been talking about housing issues in very specific contexts, urban contexts. This movement is primarily a movement of rural laborers and workers, rural laborers and farmers, very small farmers, and many of them identify as Dalit farmers. And the kinds of issues that the movement has been working, and the movement itself evolved from a collaboration, an alliance that critiqued NGO-based empowerment. So empowerment is not a funded project, but when questions of empowerment permeate all of life. So you can't compartmentalize gender from caste, from land, from state corruption, from access to irrigation waters, etc., etc. So when life is not a project, and then everything becomes politics, and how do we become alliance workers in that kind of a conceptualization of politics. So the kinds of battles over the last 15 years that the Sangtin Kisan Mazdoor Sangatan has been involved in include access to irrigation waters. There were like 40,000 farmers who were not getting access to irrigation waters at all. The government makes one policy after another in the names of right to information or access to a particular kind of, like the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, and there's tons of corruption involved in everything in the name that's launched in the name of the poor. So how do you make the government accountable while also not believing necessarily in the government? So you make government responsible for the things it has promised you, but also continue an anti-state agitation at the same time on questions of caste, on questions of gender, questions of land, and so on. And so SKMS is also a very active part of the National Alliance of People's Movement in India. So I just want to just make some connections. I think there were some very, very beautiful and powerful comments made yesterday in the evening session about education. And so some of the things that that conversation triggered. So I think Ken shared how some organizations in South Africa make a point to say that we are poor but we are not stupid. And in that vein, just extending that comment. For SKMS, one of the things that has been really important for the Alliance is to kind of underline both for us to internalize, all of us from various locations in the movement, that the margins are not the margins. What if the margins are the center? And then what does it mean for us to really believe in that? That if the margins become the center, then how everything needs to shift? And what does that mean for us in terms of bringing that insight back into everything that we do, everything that we live? So as part of that, many things happen, but one of the things that also happens is that the discourse of privilege becomes more complex. If privilege is not just simply a privilege, but privilege is also a loss, if the margins become the center, then privilege also becomes a loss. And what does it mean to live with that, to inhabit that, to dwell in that reality as we try to work together to build a different kind of vision of learning, unlearning, relearning, etc. So I think another piece that came up yesterday was about scale, that what happens. So this movement started with as an agitation against an NGO-based empowerment theme. It started as a writing project of 9 activists. 8 of them were activists and who were grounded in the soil of Sitapur district, and I was the one who was coming from various places, including Lucknow and Minneapolis. But really, as this became like a growing movement of thousands of farmers and laborers, one of the questions for us was how do we what are the pedagogies by which we can do the very, very difficult work of deep, critical, internal self-reflection, where all the things that we replicate in our very intimate dynamics, we also continue to question that, even as we keep bringing. So the braver we are in the intimate conversations, the more it is that intimacy and that intensity of brave conversations that makes us courageous when the people rally and say to the district development bureaucracy that you guys are our servants. You may think of us as your servants, but you are the ones who work for us. And what does it take for this kind of a movement to get there? And so this challenge of how do you sustain, as a movement grows, how do you sustain that kind of very intense dialogue in intimate spaces while also building the movement, expanding from one village to another. So in this kind of work where we don't think of, it's not that the movement is against the idea of leadership, but it's like there have to be different clusters of leaders taking the driver's role at different times. So, leaders, there are people who are leaders and then the leaders become followers. And what does it mean to imagine a movement where different people where everybody has some space where they are leading? And that is a very important part of this kind of unlearning and relearning that we talk about. So coming back to the question of theater, how does one open up the meaning of theater? So the movement itself is a theater. There are conversations that are on the backstage, there are conversations that are on the front stage. There's lots of things on the backstage that do not come on the front stage when we rally or when there's an open encounter with the government officials, etc. So continuously thinking about the theater as movement, and then also bringing those understandings back into the movements of the theater. So how do the lessons from the movement continue to so it's not like we are bringing a particular kind of recipe of political theater to the movement, but how the movement then pushes us to think about theater and definitions of acting, definitions of what it means to build a different kind of different practices, different pedagogical practices together. So I mentioned this yesterday in the workshop, but it's like movement then becomes not only movement in the ways that we are familiar with, but it's also an opening up. It's the moving of the heart, it's moving of the mind, it's mobilizing people, it's about moving paradigms, it's all of this. And it's very, very intense emotional labor at the same time as it is political labor, and it doesn't end. So again, improvisation is another concept that's very useful here, because it's everything, you're always improvising, you never arrive at a strategy. Everything changes according to context and audience. when you upgrade a struggle, you take it from one village to 100 villages, to the district development officer, to the sub-district magistrate, to the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, to New Delhi and Jantar Mantar. It's like with every step, the movement learns something. It's a different theater. It's a different articulation. It's a different vocabulary. So again, like it's like never the work of the alliance worker is never fully determined. It's like you have to be a very imaginative laborer in the alliance work, because you have to, at no point somebody will say this is your duty, this is your role. You have to always be figuring out what it is that you can do where you can be useful. And sometimes you will make mistakes, sometimes you will do something that's useful. But like, and trying to understand this not as just some random thing, but as a rigorous labor. How do you understand the politics of this work, articulate it, and claim it as part of what alliance work should be? And I think living in the academy, that's really becomes complicated, because everybody's supposed to like propose a project. You have to become expert of everything. We teach our students to like be confident, and this is all about like you can be confident, but the confidence has to be grounded in some very deep relationships. And how do you continue that process of continuous learning? So yeah, so I think those are the kinds of things I wanted to say about the SKMS site, and maybe Tarun can talk a little bit about the cities that we've been working in.
Yeah, we have been working in Lucknow, as the capital of Uttar Pradesh, and Mumbai is the capital of Maharashtra. And then I've been coming to Minneapolis since 2008, and the South Asian communities in Minneapolis, and bringing sensibilities, lessons to places where we are located. Taking text of caste, class, rural politics, unlearning the gaps of time and place, means we took a story of a famous writer of India. His name is Munshi Premchand, and he wrote a story called Kafan. So, and that story I shared with in Maharashtra, domestic workers and with some trained actors. I bring them together and ask them to come, and we will start doing something out of this. And slowly how they all become part of that story, they imbibe that story. So that's how we take this thread of theatre and how to learn. A different kind of vocabulary was evolved. They learned, because some of them who were domestic workers, they cannot read or write. So they become a community, and these people who are trained actors and educated in institutions, they become partner and they learn with each other. And they become very active partner and fellows together.
So about this, I'll just say that, so I think just to quickly connect with that, in this theatre, what we started doing in Lucknow and Mumbai and Minneapolis, all of a sudden the theatre becomes a place where alternative readings and alternative openings about what alliance work can mean through theatre come about. And then I just want to quickly also say about the classroom as theatre. So then what does it mean to bring these sensibilities back into the classroom spaces of the University of Minnesota? And last semester, Tarun and I taught a course where the principle was that students in the class cannot just consume stories of struggle, that we are not offering you story after story about settler colonialism or Adivasi politics, or what do you bring to a story? If you are not just going to sit and consume the story, what can you offer? And it was very beautiful process of how people learn to let go of their stories, that once you circulate that story out there, that is your intimate story, what does it mean to sit with it, analyze it, make it part of theatre? And a very beautiful play came out from this work called Retelling Disappearing Tales. And I can say more about that if there's, there are questions later on. But I think it's just, again, how do you connect different sides and the lessons? If we are thinking of schooling and the politics of education as like really opening up these dynamic spaces where people who we don't expect to be the theorists or the knowledge makers, what does it mean to take that principle seriously and to kind of destabilize all of these various sites. And I'm going to just stop there.
Yeah.